We think of this as the lampstand. This had no measurements. They just said, take one piece of gold. I can't even imagine as an artist. I had a hard time making it out of clay. Take one piece of gold and hammer it into this lampstand with a centerpiece and then 3 on either side. So many people like to say, well, the reason that there was no measurement to it is because you cannot measure Christ as the light of the world. You can't measure that light, in general. So this was kept, all the oil was kept in here, and he was to make sure that that was burning at all times, This was called the table of showbread, and it really had 6 and 6. It had 12 loaves of bread, and they would go around to the tribes on the outside and each one would have to, and it's a precursor to the modern day offering. So they would go and each tribe would give a loaf of bread. The priests would come in and they had this ornate thing where they take out the old ones and then put in the new ones. And of course, maybe you've heard the story about how David got in trouble because he ate the showbread and that kind of thing. What it really means is it's the bread of presence, meaning it was the bread put before God. So it's like an offering. So they had to change that out once a week. Otherwise, it was in there. This is also the precursor to communion. And Christ is in this because he's not only the light of the world, but he is the bread of life. And also, when we sit down to communion, we are eating that bread and drinking the wine, which represents the blood, which came from there. So this also is a precursor to that. And then this little thing here is called, and by the way, does anybody, I guess you can guess what these are. This is for when they had to transport it. Every time they moved, they took it. This is called the altar of incense. Now this had an incense mix in it that was very specifically mentioned also, and it burned constantly, and the priest's duty was also to do that, to keep that burning. Now there are 2 things going on here. When we think about this, and Christ is our intercessor, but also this incense in the New Testament, it says that the prayers of the saints are like incense in the nostrils of God. And I want to tell you, if you're praying for somebody or you've ever had a prayer in your heart, prayers are eternal. Long after you're gone, I know people who were blessed by a grandmother or an aunt or someone who passed on, and they saw the results of someone who prayed for them. So never give up. If there's anybody that you love in your life that's not doing well, that you're worried about, that's hurting, never give up, because that is always there. I mean, I remember this lady, she was on a plane during the 9/11 thing, and the plane would not land, and everybody was getting very nervous, so they were going to have to go to Greenland and everything. And the first thing she thought of, she said, I looked around and I thought, I bet there's people on this plane that no one's ever prayed for, that literally lived their whole lives and there's no one in their life praying for them. So, I had just never thought about that because, I was always people have been praying for me and I've been praying for them. But it makes a difference and it does matter. So don't ever give up because you think it doesn't matter. And this incense does reach the throne of God. It really does. And Christ is our intercessor now. So this had to be kept burning. Now, if we look at this as us, the outer court represents our body, which is bronze, which is important, but it's the least important. If we look at this part of the holy place, this is who God created you to be. In Psalm 139, he says, "You're fearfully and wonderfully made. I created you in your mother's womb." He had a plan for you, and everybody had a different plan. But you know what happens? We come into the world, and we come into a fallen world. And what happens is you come into that world with only the voice of God. You notice how children are so receptive to the Lord? It's not because they're babies or they're stupid. It's because they still hear that voice of the one who said, this is the plan I have for you, and it's a good plan, and this is what I want for your life. But then we start hearing those other voices, and we start hearing the one who says, well, you're stupid, you're lazy, I don't want you to do this, I want you to be a doctor, I don't want you to be an artist, I want you to do that. Or it may even be well-meaning voices. And they start to cloud out that one true voice. And many times when people come to a saving knowledge of Christ, or they'll get to a point where they say, well, yes, they say I'm a new creature, but really, I'm just getting back on the track that was meant for me from the beginning. So this is who you were. And even though we say we die to ourselves, this is very valuable. Who you are as an individual, as a total individual, and the fact that you're different than anybody else in the world is very important. And don't lose that part, because that's the part that God created for a purpose. So, now, let me give you a little fun fact here, because we're getting almost to the end. Now, there was a curtain here that was between, it was right here where that was. So we got a picture of this curtain here, right here. So, and there was still that curtain there. So now the priests who came in here, not Aaron, the high priest, they would come in here and they had those duties I explained to you. And at the end, they would fill everything, and then they would stand in front of that curtain like this. Now, the funny thing is, God told them his name, but, you know, we like to get religious on God. So what happens is, he told the Jews that they could tell, he says, I'll tell you what my name is. And then they wouldn't say it. We're so holy, we're holier than God, because we make up all these religious rules, and, okay, we do it this way, they do it that way, and all this, and God's, you know, said, you know, I gave you free will. Don't bring back the old covenant. You know, I'm giving you the new covenant. Like you were saying, he gave them a day off. They still wouldn't take it off, you know. So that's what he said. He said he gave them the Sabbath, and we're still running around grumbling, and they're trying to figure out something to do on the Sabbath. But we get religious on God. So he was standing there, but he wasn't saying Yahweh, because he couldn't say that, you know. But he would worship. He would praise God in front of that curtain, but he couldn't go on the other side of the curtain because that was all he was. Now, one of the fun facts here, which is really a rather interesting fact about the repetition thing I told you, is that these guys did this over and over again at exactly the same time of day, over and over and over again. So that the day that Christ was crucified, and he died, what, on the 9th hour, God knew someone was going to be standing right there when that veil split, because it says in there that on the 9th hour, when he said it was finished, that veil, well, how'd they know? Well, they were in the temple doing what they'd been doing from the time of the desert. So that, even that detail is there. And the other fun fact is, as you know, I know there's a lot of scholars in here, who knows who Zechariah was? Whose daddy was he? John the Baptist. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So, yes, he was John the Baptist's father. And now the interesting thing about, now I got this from my scholarly daughter, not me. She said, did you know that Zechariah was a Sadducee, not a Pharisee? Now, the Pharisees believed in the supernatural. They believed in angels, demons, resurrection, the whole 9 yards. But the Sadducees were moralists. There were like a lot of us today, a lot of Christians who believe, well, I'm going to live a good moral life, and yes, I go to church, and I believe in Jesus, and I wear a coat and tie, and I don't cuss, and I don't cheat on my wife. You know, well, he didn't die that bloody death just for us to be moralists, but, you know, that one. Anyway, but really, that's what the Sadducees were. They were moralists. They thought, a good life, I'll be blessed in this life, and that's a good deal. So, and that's why he quizzed Jesus and kept saying, well, what if this one dies, and then they marry the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and he knew what they were up to. They were trying to say, well, who will that person be married to when they get to heaven if they've married 7 people who are widowed? And that's because he knew they didn't believe in the resurrection. So, of course, he told them that was not going to be the case. Well, here's the deal. Zechariah was a Sadducee. Faithful man, loved the Lord and all that. So it was 10 times more of a miracle when an angel appeared to him. Now, the people that know me, if I walk out and say I saw an angel, wow, that's Claudia. You know, she sees angels around every corner. But when he walked out and couldn't talk and told them that he was not going to name his son Zechariah, but he was going to name him John, it was way more of a miracle. Because